Welcome to Where Have All the Voters Gone? I'm Charles Uphoff. I wear a number of hats. I'm on the Dane County Democratic Party Executive Board, also on the State Board for our Wisconsin Revolution, and very active in Oregon area progressives. And my wife and I met during the McCarthy campaign in 1968, got tear gassed in Chicago during the Democratic Convention. Raised with a very progressive family. My dad actually was socialist candidate for governor in 1948 in Wisconsin. So I have a small penknife I got on my 4th birthday from Norman Thomas, who'd stopped at our farm. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm here, and I think probably why we're here. The topic for the conversation is about where have all the voters gone, and that question really bugged me. And I looked at where we were, and how did we get here? On my far right over here, the first blue map, that's the results of the election in 2006 with Herb Kohl, who carried every single county in Wisconsin except Washington County. Most of them by 65 to 70%. Every single county. Next to that was the 2016 primary, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Bernie carried every single county except Milwaukee, and it was close there. It goes from good to bad in the sense. This was the election, well, a little more positive. Obama won Wisconsin. This is the election in 2016, Hillary versus Trump. You can see there's been a change in the hue of the states. And like I said, I was looking at them figuring, how did we get there? So I spent a lot of time pulling a lot of numbers together, looking at information from the Wisconsin Elections Commission, trying to analyze data for various elections, 2006, 12, 14, 16, 18, presidential preference primary, Supreme Court race, and the most recent elections in last November. Looking at them in detail by ward, color-coded, so you can see where the votes have been and where there have been changes. The encouraging thing is even with the redistricting, I think there are some real opportunities to pick up seats if we mobilize voters. One of the things that's been a real problem, there's been usually a huge fall off in terms of midterm elections. 2020 is a presidential election. That's a real opportunity because usually more people vote. And if we can focus on a good ground game with good candidates, I think we've got a chance not only at a presidential level, but taking back some assembly and Senate seats as well. I'm going to play a short video for you, PowerPoint. Again, for me, when you see it graphically, it sort of tells you what's going on. When you can see the change in terms of the complexion of what's happened in the state in a relatively short period of time. First one with Herb Kohl, that was 2006. 12 years ago. So this is just going to be a quick replay of some of the maps. You can see the complexion of the state has been changing. I don't think the population has changed that much. So the question was, what's happened? Is it the candidates? Is it issues? Is it demographics? Or something going on in the state that we need to be paying more attention to? In 2018, Democratic candidates for the Assembly got 201,584 more votes than Republican candidates for Assembly, but it ended with only 36 Assembly seats out of 99. So over 200,000 more votes and 29 fewer Assembly seats. Part of the reality looking at it, if you look at the map for Tony Evers' campaign in 2018, he won, but outside of Milwaukee County and Dane County, he lost the rest of the state by over 250,000 votes. We can do well in statewide elections because of that margin, but if we're going to win at an Assembly level or Senate level, we really need to be focused on the bottom-up strategy and we're top-down. One of the things I've been concerned about is that when we get into campaigns, so much attention goes to the top of the ticket, in terms of media attention, in terms of publicity, and there's a real fall off. A lot of times people go and vote for the top of the ticket, don't vote down ballot. And that's a real problem for us. We need to really address that. When you start the other way around, with good, strong assembly candidates or local candidates, somebody goes out to vote for a local assembly candidate, for a Democrat, they're going to vote for the top of the ticket too. But it doesn't always work the other way around. Before we go on with the PowerPoint, I'd like to just sort of do a quick introductions for yourself. Sort of go around and tell me a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what particular interests you might have, because we've got a lot of information here for every ward in the state.
I'm Richard Russell from Madison, Wisconsin, and my primary goal is getting big money out of politics. I work with United to Amend.
And I'm Bill Dagan from Baraboo, and I'm with the Democratic Party and our revolution up there. Do a lot of letter writing.
I'm Janet Breed. I'm from Rock County with the Dems.
I'm John Mather. I'm from Iowa County.
Good.
I'm here for myself.
Hi, Sal.
And I'm Sally Mather, and I'm from Iowa County, and I work with the Muddlers, and we do a lot of grassroots organizing.
Okay.
Dan Wagner, I'm the first vice chair of Charlotte County Dems. Work with issues on environment, education, voting rights. We've got a number of initiatives that we're working on statewide. And then do a lot of letter writing. We've got a deal worked out with the paper to submit regular op-ed columns. And we have a regular radio forum in the Shawano area once a month.
Gary Olson from Black Earth, on the board of the Gateway to the Driftless, more into environmental issues than political issues, but here to learn.
Pat Boyle, Richland County, with the local Dems there, and we are trying to wake up the rural areas and mobilize these folks out here.
I'm Deb Pestle. I'm also from Richland County, and my major focus is the 17th State Senate District. Try to win some hearts in the face of gerrymandering, and maybe.
Well, hopefully we can provide some information that will be helpful for you in terms of targeting some areas that have been strong Democratic areas in the past and could and should be again.
Arlene Cano, I'm from Columbia County. I have a lot of interests, but how to speak to Trump supporters?
Yes. That's important.
I'm Ron Wolf. I'm from the Wanakee area. I'm involved with the grassroots group in Wanakee, called Grove. My major interests are money and politics, one, and the other one is climate change. I'm concerned about the fact that a lot of our CO2 emissions come from transportation. I think we have a rail asset in Wisconsin and in Madison that could be utilized and electrified to cut down on emissions in this area.
Yes.
I'm Leanne Ostrom. I'm from Vernon County, Norfolk, and I work with Vernon County Democrats.
Well, one of the things, and it was touched on here, one thing that became really clear, we're looking at a lot of elections and a lot of results over a period of time, is that the urban-rural divide is very real. When I'm looking at it, and all the data is color-coded, as you can see it, towns and villages, for the most part, have been going red. Cities have been blue, pretty dependently. And so I was sort of trying to figure out what's happening. One of the things that struck me, I just recently retired from the Oregon School Board, and I put together some information from school districts all around the state. What's been happening, rural schools in particular have been losing enrollment. They've been losing programs, they've been losing teachers, they've been stuck in a situation where often their property values are going down, but their property taxes are going up. They've got most of their money invested in their farm or their home. They're screwed. And I think part of what might explain the phenomenon in terms of people voting Republican, they've been sold to the idea that, well, if government isn't doing anything for you, let's have less government. And some people have asked, so what has government done for us lately? Not much in some areas of the state. Yes, go ahead.
Some of those, there's a lot of really hard ingrained mythology involved in some of that. And up in our area in Charlotte County, we say, you got genetic Republicans. I mean, they vote. You ask them, why are you voting Republican? They're constantly enacting legislation against our local interests. And a bunch of guys are supporting it. Well, my dad did, something like that. My dad votes for
A lot.
I mean, younger voters.
A lot of the things that people complain about that Madison's doing is because of the people they're sending there. That's the reality. I mean, particularly when you look at the maps, we've got to figure out how we're going to change the map.
I had like one vote, I took with our legislator, I said, and I talked with him, I said, why the hell are you voting for that? I said, this bill alone will reduce discretionary spending just in our school district by $1 million. I take discretionary money away from people. This was with Act 10. I says, why are you voting for that? I says, that the roll through on that is $1.6 to $1.8 million. We saw it on the state discretionary spending in Wisconsin after Act 10 dropped $2 billion.
Well, it's interesting looking at the school budget. If the level of funding had been maintained that was in 2010, not changed at all, it would have meant over almost $2.3 billion additional revenue to public schools.
Can I give you an example of a school? I was just at a presentation for someone from Spring Green that if their referendum doesn't pass on the 2nd, they will be closing their district. They don't even have the money to re-recovery portion or whatever you do with the school district. A year.
And the rural areas, particularly schools, are the heart of the community. In Bayfield has a median household income less than half the state average. They have 98.98% of their kids eligible for free and reduced lunch. They get $4,536 less per K-8 student than is guaranteed for a private voucher school. Now, tell me how that makes any sense at all. And there are districts all over the state. Money for voucher schools comes off the top, and whatever's left gets distributed to public schools. We cannot afford to fund two separate school systems. And right now, public schools are really hurting. And one of the things that's a reality is the opportunity going forward for kids who are not getting the kind of education they need, that's going to have a generational impact. So I'm going to, just to give you a quick show, the way forward. I was spending some time going over to Dodgeville. It's called they call it Super 17. That's the 17th Senate District. That's Chris Marion ran for Senate. The good news is they are really staying active. They've been meeting every month. They've been looking at how we can get increased turnout. The irony is that when you start looking at the demographics and the vote history in those areas, most of those wards not that long ago were voting solid Democratic. Right now, with Markline and all the assembly seats, they're all controlled by Republicans now. And I'm thinking, how the hell did this happen? So part of the plan is to try to see if we can get out and do some more listening. What's interesting, I've spent a lot of time knocking on doors. More than any single issue, people want to feel listened to. They don't even expect you to agree with them all the time, but they really want to feel listened to. And I think that's a major challenge for us in terms of turning the state blue. We need to spend more time. As delightful as it is talking to a lot of other progressives, we spend far too much time talking to ourselves. And I think part of the challenge is finding out how we can reach out beyond the comfort zone and talk to people. Yes,
Well,
Arlene.
Mike McCabe is all for this, all for this, he gave a talk in Waupun, a couple months ago. And he says, he's from a rural area, Curtis, Wisconsin,
Clark
population
County.
like 250.
Clark County.
Yeah. And he says they don't feel listened to, and they think, well, if their perception is that the government is not doing anything for us, or not much at all, and to some extent they're right, in some cases, but the perception is much larger. And so they think, well, the next best thing, if the government's not doing anything for us,
Yeah.
shrink the government.
Yeah.
So that's their overall attitude. And Mike has some ideas. I recommend that you listen to him or go onto his website, Blue G Nation. They have a booth there. So how to talk to them, and without turning them off. He said that Mike, when he ran for office, he had 2 instances where people came up and introduced themselves saying, I'm a deplorable. And he continued to talk to these people. And the one guy actually said, he says, I'm not going to vote for you. He says, but I might look into more about what you're saying.
I've had some interesting experience talking to a neighbor over a couple of years who I had met, who's a Trump voter, and a good person, and an artist, and libertarian, and watches nothing but Fox News. And so we had this conversation. I said, a lot of it comes down to how do you know what to believe?
Yes.
And I shared an email with her where PolitiFact basically had done an analysis of Fox News, and they basically said 80% of what they're telling you is crap. And I said, you don't need to take my word for it, but at least should give you some pause when thinking about how you have, developed the kind of opinions that you have. It made a little progress. She now thinks Trump is a jerk. But I mean, part of the challenge, I think, again, is reaching out beyond our comfort zone,
Yes.
talking to people. I think we need, one is to do some listening and be able to not tell them what to think or what to do, but ask good questions.
Yes.
Like, does it seem right to you that Amazon made $211 billion in profit and is paying not a penny in federal income tax? Does that seem fair to you? Most people don't. I served as coordinator of Wisconsin Governor's Conference on Children and Families, and we had the whole range from Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum people to left, middle, everything in between. The thing that was encouraging when we sat people down in a room without labels and asked them to talk about what they wanted for their kids and for families, there was a huge amount of agreement across the board. People want good schools, affordable health care, clean environment, safe communities, transparent, responsive government, fair taxes. So what's the problem? We have agreement on so many things in terms of what people want. Obviously some concerns and differences about how we get there. And it seemed to me the conversation should be around, so what works? Yes, sure, go ahead.
I've got a question. I've been thinking about brainstorming what I might do for the rest of the year to try to reach new people. And based on what I've read and whatever, if you start with politics, you're dead in the water. If you start with facts, you're dead in the water, because they're not, logic and rational and facts isn't where most people are. And so what I'm thinking about doing is trying to organize a variety of forums on local, environmental, or just local issues that are nonpartisan, to bring large groups of people to sit and talk and start talking about issues that are very much of interest to everyone, but at least at the initial levels, they're not partisan. The solution is always partisan. Yes, but the initial issue and the discussion of those issues is not partisan. And so what I'm interested in is what the folks here, what your thoughts on that kind of a strategy.
Well, I think it's important. Relationships are tremendously important. If you're really interested in trying to have some impact and persuade people, credibility and relationships are, I've knocked on a lot of doors in Oregon, Ann Peterson lives just north of Oregon High School. Ann has a dog named Charlie. So whenever I stop, how's Charlie? You know, a personal connection is really so important. When you're talking to people, what I do, I tend to start talking about introducing myself in terms of, I got 3 kids, 5 grandkids, a little bit of what they're doing. Everybody has got family connections, a touchstone, a common thing that we share in terms of concern about what kind of opportunities our kids are going to have, what's happening to the environment, what problems or concerns about perhaps the system, the government not being as responsive as we'd like it to be. Most people feel in some sense at some level that the system is stacked or rigged. There's one thing about Trump that he was right. The system is rigged. You know, to his benefit. So, well, you sort of touched on what I brought up for the next slide, which is engage. How do we engage people? I've been really working on practicing talking to strangers. When I go to the grocery store before the election, I go up to people I've never seen before. Are you registered to vote? Most people say, thank you. Yes, I'm planning to vote. I went to see, I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Vice about Dick Cheney. So it's showing at what used to be Sundance Film Festival, small audience, maybe 20 people. And after the movies got over, I got up and say, so did everybody vote? And people say, who is this? But it actually started some conversations. People did vote, but it turned out really, again, the interesting thing about connections, turns out there were 3 people there, retired teachers from Oregon who I didn't know. And it turns out that the cousin of one of the people had stayed at our farm when I was 4 years old. How are you ever gonna, be aware of those kind of connections unless you take the time to reach out to and talk to strangers? Because it's the old mantra, every friend was once a stranger. And what's been really encouraging to me is to see how many opportunities there are for real human connections with people sitting next to someone on the bus or an airplane or whatever, and just having real conversations. That's a really good way of starting the process of engaging people. And again, sharing your personal information. Personal stories can be very powerful in terms of what's happening with family, kids. That's something that everybody can relate to. So the next part of the process is inform. Whether it's CAFOs with the concentrated animal feeding operations, or whether it's what's happening in the economy, or whether it's happening in public education. Again, to the extent that you can make those stories personal has a much more impact than just trying to push facts at people. Most people, sadly, don't make their decisions based on facts. Yes, I had a question.
So my point, was that
Sure.
the facts don't seem to matter with most people right now. So what does? Where do we go?
Well, I think what does matter is that a lot of people have shared concerns about what's happening. And that's where the listening part is really important, trying to figure out, it's going to be different depending on who you're talking to. But if you're talking to them and saying, so how are things going? Anything new? Do you have kids? Great, what are they doing? In other words, trying to find out a little bit about what's going on in their lives. That's important because, again, people want to feel listened to, but it also gives you an opportunity to share your story. I'm really concerned about what's happening in terms of climate change. I don't know whether we're going to have a habitable planet in 20 years if we don't do something to turn things around. A lot of people sort of throw up their shoulders. They don't know what to do. It seems too huge. Pointing to what's happening with the kids. One of the most exciting things that I've seen happen has been what's coming out of Parkland and out of the climate change issue. Young people getting involved. They've got more at stake than anybody else. Anybody who's got kids has a stake in this discussion. I don't know whether people, not everybody's comfortable sharing information about their family, but that's a point at which people really do relate. And so I think that's a helpful starting point. Like I said, pushing facts at people doesn't tend to help, but asking good questions does, because it makes them sort of think through their own answer to, like the question I asked before about, does it make sense to have a corporation making $211 billion paying no income tax? If they're not paying their tax, you know who's paying it. You're paying it. Does that seem fair? Yeah,
Yeah,
Dan.
one of the things that they've done a lot, it's been a big driver for Republicans, been a big driver for fascist governments and everything else, was using fear because emotion trumps fact. And they've been driving this constant fear, the southern invasion, and they're going to take your jobs.
Caravans.
None of which is true, but I think you hit on that too, though, that I think you're seeing a little bit more, at least in the progressive movements, that motivation of love, where you're going love of children, grandchildren, etc., in terms of climate change, or in terms of look what happened to the kids in Flint about water quality, and pushing that as putting that in, say, you can kind of like guilt trip on and say, look, if you're willing to let them pollute the water, foul the air, do all these other things, ruin the environment, and drive people out of their homes and that, vote for these guys. If you love your children, you love your grandchildren, you want a good place to live and you want to protect those kids, do that. And that's a big motivator, especially in the groups that right now are voting heavily for the GOP, older whites, evangelicals.
One of the things sort of picking up.
So kind of using those motivations as a counter to these fear motivations, constantly pushing this. I say all the years I'm on Social Security. I've never been in a gunfight or never had maybe I just live a charmed life or I'm too big to attack. I don't know, but I said, what is all this stuff? I got all kinds of guns. I hunt. I like trap shooting. I like target shooting, stuff like that. But I don't automatically. My first thought is, oh, there's somebody at the door. I better grab my gun. That's what my dog's for. So, because she's all thunder and no lightning. So.
Well, one of the things that I have been struggling with is trying to figure out how we break down this rural-urban divide issue. Particularly, one of the areas, for example, clean water, which was in southwestern Wisconsin, in Kewaunee County, there are literally 40% or more of the wells that are contaminated to the point where they're not suitable for human consumption. If you've got a farm, if you've got a house and you've got a polluted well, how are you going to sell your property? You're getting on in years. Your kids, if they graduated, have moved out. The populations in those areas are often getting older. All their money's tied up in their farm or their house, and now their well has gone bad. That's not because government did it, that's because there wasn't adequate regulation on the kind of concentrated animal feeding operations that has resulted in pollution. There are parts of Wisconsin where the water quality is worse than it is in Flint, Michigan.
To give you an example, we had a forum in Richland County last Saturday on water quality. 73 people.
I had gone down to Albany when they were having a DNR permit hearing on a proposal for one of the concentrated animal feeding operations. Over 250 people showed up. Family Farm Defenders, Farmers Union, our Wisconsin Revolution, a lot of people. I thought, this is great, but it really needs to be a sustained effort. And again, part of the thing is, it's great to show up for a demonstration or a hearing, but you need to be in that legislator's office immediately following the following week. You need to make sure that the pressure continues, because there are a lot of other voices coming in too, and a lot of other people providing money. So, yes, sure.
When you're talking about the rural-urban divide, have you seen any data or any opinions on what the rural opinion is of Foxconn? Because to me that seems to be, and I think it actually played somewhat in this last election, because that's a classic issue in which rural communities are getting nothing out of this. And whatever becomes of it, which that's up for grabs, would obviously, it probably northern Illinois and southeast Wisconsin, that's heavily urbanized, would really benefit from it.
Well, if in fact, yeah, but they're also incurring a huge cost in terms of infrastructure that they have to, it's not clear that how or if that's ever going to be fully paid off. Yeah.
But in terms of the rural-urban divide, did a lot of work with Chris Marion in the 17th.
Yeah.
In Richland County and the surrounding areas. And what a lot of us found out was we stopped using the word Foxconn because for a lot of people, they didn't know what we were talking about. And so we talked about the fact that, they're throwing money at a foreign corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And that went, but Foxconn, there were an awful lot of folks that it didn't.
Yeah.
They had never heard of it.
Yeah, good point.
Take a look at the screen. This is an interesting one because this is the 17th Senate District. All of those wards that are colored blue or sort of light green, they all voted Democratic for Obama. All of them. And yet that Senate district and all the Assembly districts are represented by Republicans. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
The people that I've gotten into debates with are people, it had to do with what they're reading. And a lot of them are reading, not only going to Fox News, but they're reading these blogs. And the blogs, I just was trying to just ask them what it is that they're so upset about, why they love Trump and why they're so upset. Some of them really upset at Hillary. And one example was this one, it was a woman that I knew, and I always thought pretty logical, pretty rational, but she had gotten to going onto this blog, and the blog was saying, it got into these people that attack kids, and Hillary Clinton has gotten some publicity on these blogs for basically going after little children.
Pizzagate?
Pizzagate.
Pizzagate.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that's in there is so hard to believe. You read it and you think, how can anybody believe anybody?
Well, that, John, that really speaks to the point I tried to make earlier. That is, in the conversation I had with this woman who voted for Trump, comes down to how do you know what to believe? And if you're just relying on a single source like Fox News, you're putting yourself at serious risk of being easily misled. One of the challenges here, and a great quote from Mark Twain, is that it's a lot easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled.
I think the other one was a lie gets around the world twice before the truth gets out of bed.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I think before the truth gets its pants on.
Yeah, something like that. Well, there's a couple interesting things on Fox News. One, they can't call themselves Fox News in Canada because they have a law that you actually have to tell the truth.
Truth and
Yeah, so they call it the Fox program or the Fox Information Hour or Opinion Hour. And then the other thing was a university did a study, and they found that if out of 5 political questions, Fox viewers on average got 1.909% right. If they had absolutely no information about politics at all, they got 1.22%.
They still got higher.
So they said actually being totally ignorant made you smarter than the Fox people.
I put up on screen something to take a look at again. When you look at the color there, it's sort of illustrative of both the challenge and the opportunity. All the wards on screen, all those wards voted for Obama or for Dallet or for Herb Kohl. I mean, wow. Why are these areas being represented by Republicans?
I think it's a related question.
Sure, go ahead, Bob.
A number of people have pointed out that in the last election cycle or two, most of the politicians, they are not putting Democrat or Republican on their literature. You can look at their signs, you can listen to their TV ads, and they don't tag themselves as Democrat or Republican.
And most of the
I'm
Republicans
wondering-
were
and
saying
I'm
they were
wondering,
for
is that a
protecting
good thing?
pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that is a good thing for us, or is that a bad thing for us? Because I have some people saying, let me know you're a Democrat, so I'll vote for you, type of thing. And so,
Yeah,
how does that interrelationship then? Because I'm wondering then if we're trying to detach, if politicians are trying to detach themselves from the party, do we want to then focus more on local issues and grab people's hearts with the local issues? Forget Republican or Democrat, approach these things as local issues, now go find the person that addresses
You hit
this
it, Bev, you
concern.
hit it on the head. The conversation doesn't start with party labels, it ends with party labels. It starts with talking about the issues, the things that you're concerned about. And if these are the things that you're concerned about, this is why you should be voting Democrat.
well, but to your point that you made just a minute ago, you said that Howard Markleiner, I think that's who you were alluding to,
Yeah.
had pretty much hijacked the Democratic platform and ran on the issues that Chris was running
Yeah.
on. But see, that's where, are we at an advantage to identify ourselves as Democrat or Republican or not? I mean, by not identifying ourselves, we're allowing the opposition to get our agenda, our
Oh, absolutely, you do
platform.
need to identify yourselves, but that's the end of the conversation, not the beginning of the conversation. In other words, it ends up by saying, if these are the issues they're concerned about
But if
climate,
you call yourself progressive,
yeah,
there are Democrats and there are Democrats.
yeah. And to be real honest, there are some areas where the term progressive is identified as elitist.
Yeah, sure.
And that's important to, yeah, go ahead.
In my county, Rock County, the executive board was just overtaken totally overthrown by a group of young people, and everybody was replaced. Everybody. And the people who replaced them were young people who, for the first time in their whole life, showed up for that vote and registered as a Dem, and then their people got them elected and brought enough folks along with it to do that. And I'm just laying the background here. Their goal is that they want to identify everybody that they see as having democratic values, and especially in races that are supposed to be nonpartisan, the county board, the city council, the school board. They want to endorse every candidate that they see as being democratic.
Make everything partisan.
They make everything partisan. They think that, their argument is that everybody who is endorsed by the Dems will bring out more support for that Dem. Our county tends to be more democratic, although it's losing some of that.
Yeah.
I noticed on the other hand that Lisa Neubauer, on the other hand, is telling people, including us in our party, our county, not to identify her as a Democrat. She won't be identified, and one of the consequences of that is that our Janesville Gazette, which is very Republican, just endorsed her. And they would have never done that if she'd have been identified and supported by us in our county as a Democrat. So that whole issue is problematic.
John had a question.
I think we need to be a little bit concerned about trying to become identified, as progressives, having too much hope in the Democratic Party. The last couple of days, there's been an interesting news article that has said that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is doing everything it can to suppress new progressive candidates, and only giving money to incumbents to try to keep incumbents in. So people, some of the newer people that have come in Congress in the last year or so that have gotten an awful lot of press, in my mind more than they should, have gotten the Democratic congressional campaign to look at this and only support incumbent candidates in races where there's incumbents. Second thing I wanted to say is, those are maps of counties, right?
Yes.
So I think it would be interesting to look at them by ward and by district, because that's a kind of a different way of looking at it. It might be that if we kind of unpack that, it's
Yep.
going to look better if we can get fair maps.
Absolutely.
A huge thing. Second, a third thing is voter turnout.
Mhm.
If I'm living in one of the northern counties and I'm a progressive voter, I'm not very motivated to go to the polls if I think I'm going to be overwhelmed by all these conservative voters. So I think voter turnout is as big a problem as where.
It absolutely is, and it varies a lot by state. One of the things that I've done, and I want to try to get into this, if I can move that. Looking at ward by ward is really critical. That's where I'm encouraged, because I think there are some opportunities here. I'll bring this one up. This is a list of every assembly and senate district in the state, and looking at the results for elections in Poland. You can see broken down here. This is, again, broken down by ward. This is for Adams County. Votes cast for governor in yellow, in the first column to most to the left, and then in the Senate seat. One of the things that's turnout is again an issue. For example, in Milwaukee County, Tammy got 30,000 more votes than Tony. 30,000, that was more than the total margin. You know, there are areas of the state, I'm trying to see if I can find this.
Is that online anyplace? I know.
This is a compilation of a whole bunch of stuff. Ultimately, all the data that I have here came from Wisconsin Elections Commission. They have websites, spreadsheets showing for assembly elections, gubernatorial, but it's all scattered. And basically what I've tried to do is pull it together and then color code it so you can actually see what's been going on. Again, this is Adams County. Adams County is not a hugely progressive area, but look, those are all wards that voted Democratic in 2012, and you can see on the farthest left is the Obama campaign, on the right is Baldwin.
You mean on the right where the blue is?
Yep, where the blue is on the right. The narrow column on the right, those are wards that voted for Baldwin.
It's on the back, right, of your handout.
Yep. But when you scroll down, look at this. This is Ashland County. Again, this is where you can see the difference here. Toward the top, towns and villages. City of Barron, of Chetek and Barron, those 10 went Democratic. There's a lot of blue here. There is an opportunity, yes, go ahead.
One interesting element of this last election that people would say that Dane County and Milwaukee County, were instrumental in turning the outcome for Josh and Tony and the other candidates. But they did remarkably better statewide than they did in 2014. So you know, all these local electorates may have still voted predominantly Republican, but Tony and the other top candidates did dramatically better statewide.
Yeah, there's a little bit of schizophrenia, I think, in Wisconsin.
You think?
Yeah, right. That's deep. That has deep roots.
I mean, we've been from LaFollette to McCarthy. From Tony Earl and Gaylord Nelson to Walker. I mean,
Well, and with the socialists in between, they're thinking about Milwaukee and the mayors.
well, one of the things, you know, I'll put a personal plug, because I mentioned my dad was a socialist candidate for governor. But Milwaukee in the last century, most of the mayors of Milwaukee were socialists. And in 1936, Dan Hone, who was socialist mayor of Milwaukee for 24 years, was on the cover of Time magazine, hailed as the ablest public servant in the country. Milwaukee had, during the Depression, low public debt, public housing, you know, public transportation, parks, you know, low crime rates, low insurance rates. What really bugs me a lot when you hear the current conversation about, we don't want to go socialist. I mean, next thing you want to know, they're going to have public funded fire departments. I mean, it is the point of ridiculousness. I mean, from my perspective, again, having grown up in a democratic socialist, very progressive family, I've never really understood what it's really about. It's just all those things we've decided we can do better if we do them together. Roads, police departments, fire departments, you know, schools, museums, libraries, parks. What's so scary about that stuff?
I have a real bone to pick because people talk about socialists and capitalists. Well, we'd stick with the democratic socialists.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever heard anyone talk about democratic capitalists? Right?
It's a non sequitur.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The democratic part of the discussion is missing when they start talking capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I really think, now, for what it's worth, and I'm sure some of you don't agree with me, that Elizabeth Warren's starting to talk about democratic capitalism. So many percentage of every public board should be elected by the workers.
Yeah.
I can't remember what other issues that right now, the particulars who would follow that, but it drives me nuts when you watch the television, capitalism versus socialism, but they don't mention the democracy is what's
that's
what
the
we're
critical
losing right
element.
now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know,
compare apples to apples, and actually they're apples to oranges, because capitalism is an economic system.
Right,
Socialism
right.
is a way to
Political.
go.
Absolutely.
I never
You know,
thought
I
about
think
that,
Two
but-
different scales.
the challenge in
But
some
nevertheless,
respects.
if you put democratic in front of each of them, and then you ask that Republican, define democratic capitalism for me, and give me an example. Well,
They don't believe
you've
in
got 'em.
democracy.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you talk about Republican talking points.
Yeah.
We have to be creative here.
You can
Yes,
equate
yes,
communism with capitalism because it's based on community production, you know, the greatest good for the greatest number, but not socialism.
Yeah, but you see, you didn't mention democracy in either case. That's what I'm
Well,
getting at.
yeah, that's true. Well,
As soon as they mention it, you go right for democracy.
yeah, it's socialism versus, well, okay.
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah, that's it. See, I've got you followed.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, it works.
Can I bang my head?
And no one does this.
Good point, Robert. Very good, Bill. Robert, you had a question.
It was just a comment, is when somebody asks me, well, do you believe in socialism, do you believe in capitalism? I would say, I actually believe in both. I believe in socialism for necessities and capitalism for luxuries.
The reality is there is no economic system in the world that is entirely one or the other. Everybody's got a mixed economy, whether it's Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Germany, France, or the United States. We're Medicare, Social Security, you know, FDIC, national parks. They're basically also, if you call it, they're basically all socialists. So the really critical thing is sort of having a conversation about what are the things that we can do better together. And drop the labels. I think labels get in the way sometimes.
I think that would be the very best, but that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
That's why I'm coming up with this.
Ron, you had a thought in the back.
Yeah, well, not to be a conspiracy theorist here, but I'm just wondering about this whole thing with the Russian interference and you know, people that look at things on the internet that I never look at have a totally different viewpoint of the world, it seems. And I'm wondering who's feeding them this stuff and where, because some of it is so unbelievable. It makes me wonder, has anybody ever looked at the interference by, you know, they were talking about the Russian interference on the internet, any influence? I've been trying to explain to myself why Wisconsin turned. Why did they vote for Trump? It just made no sense to me. I still don't know why Wisconsin turned like that. They vote for Trump rather than Hillary. Some people say it's because Hillary never came to talk to us, but I'm thinking maybe they're reading things that I'm not seeing. And that this part of it had to do with these blogs.
A question had come up earlier, a concern about turnout. And I thought it might be useful taking a look at some of the information from the 2018 election. This is for Adams County. And the column on the right where the red numbers are, the red numbers are the fewer number of voters who voted in 2018 than in 2012. Interestingly, if you'll see, there's one, Town of Rome. There are actually 38 more people, probably Republicans, because that was one of the few wards that didn't go for Democrats. 38 more people in that one ward voted in 2018 than voted in the presidential election. Most of them, it's well under. The 149 fewer people in the town of Quincy. 149 fewer people voted in 2018 than 2012.
How much of that phenomenon do you attribute to the dissatisfied Bernie voters who just said, I'm not going to vote. My guy didn't get it. Yeah, the DNC was crappy. I'm taking all my votes and going home.
Well, Quincy voted 66.3% for Obama, but they only voted for the Democratic Assembly candidate, only 49 or 41.9%. So if they're still upset with Hillary, why would they not vote for a local Democratic Assembly candidate if they were Bernie supporters?
They just didn't vote at all.
Well, that was the 149 fewer didn't vote. But it's really, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering what class has to do with that, change in the vote. If I remember correctly, the town of Rome is the area in which they have made these man-made lakes, Arrowhead, and I can't remember what the other one is. But they're all on, they're on bodies of water, and people with money live there.
Yeah, it's referred to as Little Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, heavily Illinois.
That's probably right.
Adams County.
Yeah.
But it's really sort of interesting, like there are only a few, when you're looking at the Obama column, there are only a few wards that didn't vote for Obama in Adams County, which is represented by Republicans, yes.
There's some things that came out in that Trump essentially, they said, well, you know, he won Wisconsin, but he didn't get any more votes than Romney got. But there was a depressed Democratic vote, plus you had Jill Stein with 4% or something.
Yes.
You know, so I mean, there was some erosion in a couple places. People didn't turn out on the Democratic side, and you had another candidate maybe get something like that Nader effect with Gore, you know, where you're losing these real close races by margins that are less than what the third party eroded the support that most likely would have went to the more liberal candidate in some of those cases. Can't say for sure, but it's a factor, you know. And I think big problem with Hillary, they talk about she didn't show up in that, but I don't know that we're looking at candidates too and taking into account that you may want to put as a red flag if they have high negatives.
Whether it's true or not. Well, I think it's really important to understand life is politics. Every issue that you care about is politics. In terms of the outcome, what happens, I would take exception to the notion that gun control or climate change that are not political. Those are hugely political. The question is sort of relating to the issue raised here. Looking at the issues and where people stand on those issues, which are the candidates for office that you would support based on where they stand on gun control, where they stand on climate change, where they stand on a whole myriad of issues. I think, or at least hope, in light of what's happened most recently, that people have been disabused about the value of staying home. I really think, hopefully people have learned their lesson they should have learned a long time ago, but sitting it out just means the other side wins.